The house next door. Chapter 1. Moving in. Lena settled into her cozy cottage-style apartment just as the first wisps of autumn whispered through Maplewood, painting the town in warm hues of gold and crimson. The Victorian house next door, once a faded beauty, now stood out with its peeling paint and overgrown gardens, yet held an undeniable charm that drew her in every morning. It wasn't until the nights took hold that Lena noticed something amiss. She'd hear creaks and hushed voices carried on the wind, usually around 2 a.m., like whispers from another world. Initially, she dismissed it as household noises, but as the days passed, they grew louder, more frequent. The unrecognizable words sent a tingle through her veins. One evening, Lena found herself standing outside, heart pounding in her chest, yearning for human interaction amidst this eerie silence. Knocking on the neighbor's door, she expected an elderly woman to answer with wrinkled hands and a tired smile, but there was only stillness. As weeks turned into months, Lena tried again, hoping she'd been mistaken. No response. Her curiosity gnawed at her until one evening, while sipping tea in her living room window seat, she caught sight of the elderly woman peeking out from behind the upstairs curtains. An unmistakable gaze lingering on Lena before the blind dropped back into place. The encounter left her with more questions than answers. She knocked once more and was met with a hollow thud against wood that sent shivers down her spine. Each attempt at friendship was repelled by deafening silence. Each passing night drawing closer to midnight, when those strange sounds returned like an unsettling lullaby. Lena's imagination began to weave a tapestry of tales. Perhaps the woman lived alone and had health issues or was hiding from the world. The thought lingered until it no longer seemed plausible. One crisp autumn morning, Lena finally ventured next door, her footsteps echoing on the porch steps as she approached the dilapidated front door. She knocked harder this time, almost expecting a response, yet the heavy wooden door remained unmoving against her knuckles' insistent rap. An old newspaper caught her attention amidst the littered debris. An article dated decades back with a photograph of children gathered around a woman Lena had never seen before. They smiled, though their eyes seemed to hold more than joy. As she pulled out her phone for a better look, Lena noticed something odd on the porch. Trash bags, thick and tied to the top like body bags. The old Victorian home seemed to exhale a sigh of secrets. She tucked away the paper, a sense of unease creeping over her as evening approached with an unsettling calm. The next night, she ventured out again, this time spotting something new. An old newspaper clipping pinned to the door read, "Maplewood Murders Unresolved." Lena's fingers trembled as she plucked it from its place. The headline spoke of unsolved murders and mysterious disappearances, culminating in a tragic fire that consumed several lives decades ago. Beneath the text was a photograph, an eerie silhouette amidst flames with face obscured by smoke. A shiver ran down her spine. She retreated to her apartment, fingers tracing the edges of the yellowed paper. Who would leave such a thing? The house at night held secrets she wanted no part in, but couldn't ignore anymore. As Lena returned from her shower, there stood Mrs. Klein, standing on the porch under the flickering street lamp's glow. Wispy silver hair framing her weathered face. "You've been watching me?" the old woman asked, eyes that mirrored Lena's curiosity, yet spoke of secrets hidden in her smile. "I couldn't help but notice your curiosity." Mrs. Klein took a seat on the porch step, inviting Lena to join with an open hand. As they sat down together, Lena mentioned the noises and strange trash bags. The elderly woman took a deep breath before speaking in hushed tones. This house has been haunted for decades. Her gaze drifted toward the cottage next door. In 52, it was home to the Order of the New Dawn. Their dark rituals consumed them all. I lived here as a child when it happened. Lena's eyes widened. She'd seen nothing but shadows and an old lady in her window. Mrs. Klein leaned forward, her eyes shimmering with a mix of fear and resolve. They summoned something malevolent. It claimed 9 lives before the fire engulfed everything. The police never found the truth. After that night, I fled Maplewood, leaving behind innocence. Lena's curiosity propelled her to ask more. What happened that fateful evening? Mrs. Klein glanced back at the Victorian with a haunted gaze. The order spoke of summoning gods in their own image, rituals by candlelight. But they were wrong to meddle with forces beyond understanding. The presence took them all. Lena felt goosebumps as she glanced up toward those windows. An unspoken entity lurking within? Nowadays, Mrs. Klein continued, it said no one should venture too close after sunset lest they become the house's next offering. The unease that gripped Lena was tempered by curiosity and a desire for connection. She returned home, researching local histories late into the night, her eyes watering over horrific tales of the order and their rituals. The truth began to weave an eerie tapestry within her mind. Whispers through walls now sounded like ethereal voices. Shadows against Mrs. Klein's window transformed into dark silhouettes. It wasn't just Lena's imagination playing tricks. She approached again, finding the trash bags had disappeared during the night. That evening, she peered out her living room window to catch a glimpse of shadowy figures moving around the old house. Chapter 2. Unsettled. Dusk crept over Maplewood as Lena stood before Mrs. Klein's door once more, her heart pounding in unison with the distant wind chimes outside. The woman met her gaze, an unnerving glow dancing across weathered features. You shouldn't be here, child. Lena ignored the warning and asked about the order. Those damned souls trapped themselves. They sought power, but it consumed them. Lena, go home, Mrs. Klein urged again, her voice fading as she stepped back into the house. But you have no idea what's waiting. Lena pushed forward. With each step toward the porch, whispers became audible. Ethereal voices that seemed to carry warnings. Stepping across the threshold, they intensified, drawing Lena closer. Shadows danced along walls. In the darkness, a hand clutched her shoulder and spun her around. Mrs. Klein stood pale as a ghost. Her eyes reflected the moonlight's glow. Come with me. They descended into damp basements where yellowed photographs lined walls. The order, their rituals, and a final photo of an obscured figure in shadowed light, eerily similar to the newspaper clipping. The silhouette on that night, then. She felt a chill as they neared the center of the room, shadows coalescing into dark silhouettes, each watching her through glassy eyes. In one corner, Lena saw a framed portrait, Mrs. Klein as a girl in a white dress, surrounded by other smiling children. Mrs. Klein whispered. The order spoke of gods and was wrong. The night outside grew more turbulent as they walked toward the attic door that seemed to sigh with age. Atop a trunk lay an album filled with newspaper clippings, each image a page from history's horrors. The final photograph depicted that obscured figure, now fully engulfed in flames. Mrs. Klein spoke of screams and children taken before her eyes as flames roared and faces melted like wax. Lena's gaze found herself on the porch once more under stars. As she turned to leave, a shadow loomed behind, the silhouette Lena recognized from the photo. In that moment, an unspoken voice whispered in her mind, "Get out." She sprinted through the night back into her living room, slamming doors shut as if to hold darkness at bay. The air was heavy with malevolent energy. A presence lingered outside her door. The silhouette slid down the wall and disappeared behind a tree, face obscured. The next day, Lena approached in daylight. Shadows were gone, but so was Mrs. Klein's door. Weeks passed without word. On an evening walk, she saw her through a second-story window, a frail figure watching from behind lace curtains. Watching, waiting for something else to enter her world again. As Lena left the porch, the woman spoke in a voice carried by wind. "I'm sorry I brought this upon you." Dusk enveloped Maplewood when Lena returned home, finding an envelope slipped under her door with only 2 words scrawled in red ink: "Run." The front door creaked open as she entered. She found Mrs. Klein seated on the parlor couch, lifeless eyes that seemed to hold worlds of pain and regret. "I should have left Maplewood a long time ago, child." Lena didn't understand what had killed her until they found a journal at her funeral service, a tale of summoning gods in rituals. Pages were torn out, but towards the back, a final entry spoke of an unending darkness that crept with nightfall, consuming all who entered. In the attic, Lena realized each child from those photos was a part of the order. On the final page, children surrounded by flames and the obscured figure, Mrs. Klein's face painted in blood. Chapter 3. The Discovery. Lena slept fitfully as the wind carried an unseen language to her door, and she heard hushed voices that echoed within her dreams. A chant, then laughter. Dawn broke over a new day, with whispers lingering on the breeze. The newspaper clipping lay on her doormat, its photograph of smiling children, now streaked with crimson red. She entered to find a bloodstained message. "I am coming." The wind howled, and Lena peeked out at nightfall's approach, senses heightened as each tick of the clock seemed to carry them closer. Shadows danced outside the attic window before moving into motion. A figure moved through rain that soaked streets with a familiar silhouette, the girl from photographs. Eyes blacker than coal, skin pale. Lena clutched the journal tightly and descended into the basement. A single flashlight illuminated her path as she approached the order's remnants. Charred remains, their smiles frozen in screams of smoke that filled air. She found the woman huddled on a trunk amidst the shadows, the obscured figure, her face painted with crimson, and a girl. Eyes blacker than coal watched from the corner. A child who'd seen things no child should. "Leave now." The voice echoed through Lena's dreams as night embraced Maplewood, an unseen presence awakening something long buried. In the attic, she found Mr. Klein on his back, surrounded by the order, faces obscured and faces filled with a primal fear. The young girl stood alone amidst them all, a silhouette that was once so innocent, now the very essence of darkness. As Lena fled, whispers chased her out into the night. The figure waited by the door where shadows seemed to have life, watching as she descended toward the stairs, eyes blacker than coal, a child who witnessed unspeakable horrors and had to become them. Lena was found dead the following morning, a victim of an unknown killer. In a small notebook from that night, "I cannot escape what I once saw." The final page contained her own smile amidst children's, etched in blood.